there's going to be the natural preference would be there to stick with what they know. And so in about the last 6 months, I have been thinking about how do SJs use any? And I think it's actually part of the SJ-ness.
They reject it. They push it away. It's bad. What they like is good.
It's like, it's not the way we use it. It's, imagine if you used any and you had far fewer ideas, far fewer frameworks. You saw far fewer, or say it was like if somebody showed you the connections and you really liked the connections, but you couldn't come up with the connections yourself. So that's what the lower level NE, I think, is. They like the connections. They like the generalizing a different context. It's just that they can't come up with it themselves as well. Whereas the NP is, we love a generalization. We have that, and then we come up with another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Yeah. So even though the function is the same, it's like, but we aren't as consistent because it's new generalizations, new. Do you see what I mean? So it's that you can, because they love a procedure. So imagine what an ESTJ would be like without a procedure. They've got that extroverted practical thinking. You give them a standard operating procedure, and it's like, boom, you've just given me a framework to use my extroverted thinking, my practical thinking against, because they're going to be running everything by what is standard operating procedure. And so anything which is standard operating procedure is going to go across different situations. And so ISTP, they're going to hate standard operating procedure because they're any break, and they're going to go, no, it depends on, yes, but does the standard operating procedure fit the specifics of this situation? No, it doesn't, and then I'll throw it out, because their natural preference would be the specifics of the actual situation, whereas the SJs would look at the specifics of the situation and maybe only concentrate on those things where they, and this is another example of how they use NE. So an SJ, if they were a robot, and they're not a robot, but if they were, they've not just got one algorithm there of things to connect to. They're close, but some of them, they're close. But so it's like they've got a lot of things, a lot of frameworks that they can find connections to when they come across a new situation. So they come across a situation and they will make the link of, okay, this is what you do in this situation. And they've got this whole toolbox of techniques. But it's still a case of they have to make the connection between the present situation and then the technique. So they are doing the NE thing. It's just they're using it in a lot more low-key way than the NP is. And the irony is that the way they use NE, it results in the rigid behavior. So it's weird that it's the rigid behavior is because of the NE, but it's an NE where they can't come up with the generalizations themselves. They have to be supplied with it.
Absolutely. Well, what I've heard about it too is it's coming from, like, ours is coming from a positive place. It's coming from hopeful, it's excited, it's happy about a new idea. And they're going from it like uncomfortable, unsure, at least the way that it kind of like we do that in reverse. We do that with the past stuff, like, that's boring, I've already done it. What am I going to get from that? Some of it, like, it's a negative. The way I believe it's attributed is just that not a good experience, not positive. It doesn't sound like a great idea. And I think because they don't like to create, they don't want to risk it not working out.
Yeah, I think with the STJs especially, because I follow a lot of stuff on military technology and that lot, and I know about these long-term projects, and if you change something, just one little thing that makes it a little bit better, but it has so many knock-on effects. And so the SJs might be like, no, we're not changing it, we're sticking to the plan. Everything has been planned out. We've got all the machine and the tools and ready for it. We're not making this change. I think maybe SFJs may be more open to an idea. So, for example, my grandmother, when she was 80, traveled to Australia. So it's like, again, if it's an idea for, we could do this thing and we go together and do this adventuresome things, that's a little bit of NE. So
Yeah.
if there's a social aspect to it, oh, we could go this place together. And so,
And it might have been on with company that she's comfortable, people that, there's
yeah, she
factors
went
of
with a
that.
friend. But that's a big thing, though. I mean, that is a long flight, maybe a 12-hour flight at age 80.
Yeah, that sounds rough. After a few, I'm ready to
Yeah, but
pace down the aisles.
so it's
Yeah.
like, I think maybe, so it could be argued that the STJs don't do the NE thing, not so much because they're bad at NE, but because they're running it through the filter of TE, where it's like, okay, so you want us to drop this plan that we've all planned out and then go on to this other thing because it's more interesting. Yes, I can see it's interesting, but hey, I ain't getting my eye away from the ball of getting this particular thing achieved.
Yeah. Well, with SI, with it being so experience based, and that goes in the category of I know for sure. At least that's how I believe from the ones I'm close to and I know well. Is like this is the only reliable information is what I know for sure, and that's
Right.
what I think goes in their SI, and the rest of it's like just where it's just so funny how different I look at that and I'm like, oh yeah, no, it just is a very different outlook, but my SI is not as fun, I guess, is there.
I suppose because there's 4 different types of intelligence, it's almost like a game of paper, rock, scissors, where in certain situations it's great to have a logistical brain and get it all right. Say in retail, where you get everything right, it's razor thin margins, and you just get all the logistics right. And you have a situation where, like Walmart, where all the logistics are right and the razor thin margin. In something more entrepreneurial, that wouldn't be the place for SJs.
Oh no, they're enforcers. I mean, they're handling the routine, they're enforcing the rules. I think anyway, that they do that amazing. You give them a to-do list, and that's where it's really funny. I think I notice a lot of these preferences, like when just someone asked JI11, no, and I mean, she's going through the list, and it said she needed this form. And I was asking, well, what's the form for? She was having trouble finding it. And then I find out it's just they had wrote it wrong. They wrote the name wrong. And this is adding like double time to this poor lady who's doing the list exactly as she thinks it needs to be, but it was wrong. And so, where if you take another approach and a more ENFP approach is, well, why do we need it? Because then I'm going to decide whether I want to spend the time finding this form, figure out if I need to do something else to fill that need.
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, these days, even though I haven't got a preference for that kind of behavior, I would think, why do we need it? And I'd think, lawsuits. That would just be, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's. You don't want that, just that littlest thing.
Yeah, well, that's where someone else needs to come in, and so but the cute part and the funny part to me is that she's not asking that. She's doing it because it's on the list, and that's what you do.
Gotcha.
Whereas it goes against every part of my being to sit and be like, why do I need to do it just because it's on there?
It's almost as if where you've got the preference and the behavior, where you've got so many regulations, like, and then you've got the possibility of like the threat of legal action is so high that it's almost like forcing you to, at least you act SJ-ish, just defensively and be tied down. And so you can see it with all of these, say, SPs that want to start a business, say as a plumber or anything. It's like they have this huge burden to get through.
Yeah, well, I see it a lot in every day. I mean, you can type people just seeing how they do the work. It's so funny. We've got lots of different contractors.
That is great. If we're going off topic, but I don't care. That is a great thing. Did you tell us about that?
Oh no, it's so funny. Like you're talking about it. So people who don't show up when they're supposed to be there, or they show up and it's a mess and they're making a mess while they're doing it, or they're, just the attention to detail, where if you have like an ISTJ that have a different attention to detail than an ESTP.
Yeah.
And if I have, and we'll work with all different types of people, and just watching them in their natural environment of what they're working, it's funny.
Does the ISTJ notice things in relation to a standard, the things that don't match a set standard? whereas the ESTP might notice something that's outside of that checklist that the ISTP is measuring things against.
Yeah, I think it's just like the example I gave with, like the one I know, ISFJ, and she's going off the list, and I'm ENFP, and I'm saying, why do we need the list? Where if we're using the strengths and weaknesses of both, which you can see both, I think, is that, she's going to get the attention to detail right to a fault, because she's actually wasting her time because she's not catching the mistake because she's so busy focusing on the list. Right. Where same for me, in my opinion, with watching an ISTJ who's, focusing so intently on doing it right, and an ESTP is going to adjust for the circumstance, maybe.
So you might have a situation of, if you're looking at a thing, and I think some NTs can fall into this trap as well, where they might think, well, I didn't know to check for that. It's not one of the criteria that we're using to assess it. Whereas in the STP would because they are so malleable and they have any preconceptions, they might just notice an error, but it's an error in terms of logic. Well, this is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas the ISTJ has to have the standard operating procedure or the checklist, a standard to measure against. Mm-hmm. Whereas the ESTP doesn't have that standard. Their only standard is it dumb? Will it work? Is it illogical? They might go, well, that won't work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely see that. And I think that's where the strengths and weaknesses come in, because if the ISTJ is so stuck on the standard that they can't adapt when needed in normal everyday events, where you follow what I mean?
Yeah, I remembered something that Wojtek said about his father. The STJ ran a business in Poland, and he said he read everything on a particular book. He read everything he read every book on a particular subject. And he said he initially didn't believe him, but then he realized. And so maybe you can think the more intelligent SJs, they're not just going to be like buy one book. They're going to read pretty much all the books they can on how to do a particular thing. So it's like they're going to have all of the techniques there. So be technically very good. All the ways, keep up with all of what are the new trends coming in that people respect and have been endorsed. So it's not just a case of, I'm going to stick to this way of doing it that I've been doing it for 40 years. I'm an unthinking robot. But the real smart ones are going to have all of these different techniques and procedures, that maybe new procedures that are coming from people that they've respected. Say somebody in business someone who's got a good reputation, like someone like Jack Welch. Say he writes a business book, how to do things. They might read that book because it's the respect that comes in and the authority. And so they'll have all of these different techniques. And I suppose, so you've got that. So you could say a really well-developed kind of, we'll put that in the SI bucket, at least the way MBTI defines it in Dario, even though I don't think it's like that. But you have, then you have the situation where they're then able to know from experience to go away from the standard operating procedure. To say, give somebody else their head. And that's why I wish people would watch that video that we did on the ESTJ character, because we talked about that.
I have it on my list still, and I didn't get to watch it.
You could be the person to watch it and leave a nice comment.
All the way to the end. I'll watch it all the way through.
I think you'll love it.
I think that example you just gave is like the best way, to me, how I see SI being like a great thing, is if the person actually is taking in other things. If they're only going off of, well, this is how my parents showed me, and that's it, nothing else, no life experience of learning other ways. Then I think that their attention to detail is something special, because they have so much, I work really well with them. Different ways of doing it, but I like that idea.
Next time you work with an STJ, you could actually ask them to actually find out their process about whether they do sort of update their techniques. So there's almost as if you can get really cheeky. How often do you update your robotic algorithms?
Right? I know, I will have to ask them. Well, I do like to ask questions about what someone's interested in and things like that. But the one, a lot of the ones I know don't read a whole lot. Will like to watch a lot of political things.
No.
Maybe more ESTJs. I know. I think that's what they love to argue the points they already love to argue, which is funny. I
Yeah.
don't like to talk. I don't really worry about that too much because I'm worried about the everyday.
And it's because they are natural leader types, ESTJs. A lot of American presidents have resembled that type. But yeah, they're in charge stuff. That's a good hangout to see all the way through to the end. The one with Carol Linden, interaction styles. And then there's the one on quadras as well. I know that's a long one on
I
the
have
quadras.
that. I'll do that while I'm driving tonight. I've got to.
There's a little bit of a oral noise disturbance in the middle of the quadras one, but it doesn't last for long. So there's a bit here. Has well-developed faculties of fantasy. Often thinks up stories with entertaining plot lines, creates imaginary scenes and events, easily envisions and conceptualizes. Ooh.
Oh yeah, no, I share my visuals, very visual person.